Okay, welcome everyone to our opening keynote for GLOW. My name is Lucy Gray, and I'm very happy to introduce to you a great group of teacher educators who are going to be kicking off um, our conference today. So thank you for coming, everyone. Um, our speakers today are Kurt Bonk from Indiana University, Punya Mishra from Arizona State, Chris Dede, and Lydia Cow. Am I pronouncing your name right?
It's how, but it's okay.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry. From University of Toronto. So we've got a global group here who have been meeting on a regular basis with their podcast, Silver Lining for Learning, talking about all sorts of different topics within the field of education. It's something that you should subscribe to, and I'll let them tell you a little bit more about their work in a moment. Please note that all of our sessions are recorded, so you can go back to them and look at them when we've published them. They'll be in the replay section um, Ring Central events if you're on the conference platform, or they will be in YouTube. Um, and I think that's all you need to know for right now. But if you want to share anything in the comments, we can address comments at the end. And I'm going to turn this over to Chris and get off the stage so they can tell you about their wonderful work. Thanks for being here. We really appreciate your time. We know you're busy, and it's a great treat to have you here kicking off the conference.
So if you have a chance, please do tell us where you are in the world, and just put that into the chat in the comments. But the four of us welcome you. Thank you for coming to this opening session. We are 4 of the 5 co-hosts for the Silver Lining for Learning series. Professor Yang Zhao was not able to join us today. And our plan for the session is that I will present some origin story about Silver Lining for Learning. How did we start, and where are we now in our journey? And then each of us as co-hosts will describe a few episodes that are favorites of ours. And that way you can learn more about us, and you can learn more about the kinds of episodes that we have on the show and get some sense of the diversity of episodes. And then after that, we will all talk about some of the ways in which the episodes as a group provide a valuable kind of case study for the field and offer many opportunities for the field in terms of capacity building. So we'll each introduce ourselves as we speak. I'm Chris Dede. I'm a senior research fellow at Harvard Graduate School of Education, where for 22 years I was the Worth Professor of Learning Technologies. So in March 2020, the week that everything shut down, some of us, Kurt and Punya and I and Yang, all connected. Yang sent us an email and said, we know something about online learning. It's exciting that people will now be forced to do online learning, but they're not going to do it well, and they're going to blame the medium. And we need to do what we can to help people to do a good job of meeting the challenges of the COVID with high quality online learning. So we said every Saturday we'll get together and we will present things that are happening all across the world that we think are powerful and transformative in terms of learning technologies as models that can help people as they're struggling to cope. And then in 5 or 10 weeks, when the pandemic's over, we'll stop doing this. Well, that wasn't a great forecast. And we now actually just finished episode 213. We have 214 coming up this Saturday. None of us anticipated that we would be going on for this long, or that we would have reached the scale that we have in terms of the number of guests and different topics. And it truly is a global an international overview. There are many things that have international in the title, but they turn out to be largely domestic in one country or another. This is truly an international series that really provides a kind of perspective on what's happening around the world that we have not seen elsewhere. And that perspective is expressed in different ways. The episodes are roughly an hour long, and they have an unusual format. They're not like a webinar where somebody's giving a speech. They're not like a conference panel where 3 people are giving shorter talks and then there's some discussion among them. This is like the kind of conversation you might have at dinner. If you went to a conference and you met a few people that you hadn't known before, and you decided as a group to go to dinner, and over dinner, you just started talking informally about what each of you were doing and why it was interesting and how it might relate to what the other people are doing. So we have conversations of that type with our guests. Those conversations last roughly an hour and have many kinds of pointers to ways that people can continue to be involved with that particular topic if they're interested. And then over time, because we have episodes that are on similar topics, we refer people back and forth in the whole database to different kinds of things going on. There's also blog posts that are on the website and other kinds of resources that are on the website. And the episodes are available both in video form and as audio podcasts so that you can listen to them if you're driving a car or doing something else where video is not a great idea. All of this is done with zero funding. So we have no sponsors. We have no organizations that are involved. It's really just us as individuals. And the great thing about that is that we aren't answerable to anybody. We do what we want to do. And so far, people have liked it well enough that we have had a growing audience and a growing impact in terms of what we're saying. And the range of topics is very, very broad because each of us as co-hosts has somewhat similar interests, but also different interests. And we have different networks of people whose work we know. And so between all of us, we're able to bring forward a wide range of topics. We're able to contact through firsthand knowledge a wide variety of speakers. And we've really been able, I think, to present a very broad-based overview of what's going on in the field. So that's what I wanted to say in terms of preparing you for what we're going to do next, to each talk about a couple of our favorite episodes. But before I begin by doing that, I want to ask Punya and Lydia and Kurt if there's anything you want to add to this kind of preview.
Sure, I would love to welcome the people who have joined us from Mexico, from Costa Rica, from Brazil, from Ukraine, from Turkey, South Africa, Pittsburgh, Hawaii, Honolulu. So far, every one of those places I've mentioned, we've had a show with guests from those places. So if you are wanting to hear about what's happening in the education world in Ukraine or in Brazil or in South Africa or other parts of the world, we've probably covered it in one of our various episodes during the past 4 to 5 years. So welcome all of you. I will enjoy your questions. We'll all enjoy your questions today because we'll learn from them. Punya, or would you like to add anything to that?
Go ahead, Lydia, if you have something to say.
I'm good. I just want to say, I guess, I started listening to Silver Lining since the very beginning, and I think it was a big fan of Silver Lining for Learning. It's great to become a co-host and to be in the front stage and in direct dialogue with this education innovator around the world. And thank you for having me.
Thank you, Lydia. And I think just having you join the set of co-hosts has broadened, I think, the scope of some of the episodes that we have had. But I know we are tight on time, so Chris, why don't you just jump in? I think that'll give us some time for Q&A at the end as well.
Will do. So one of the two themes that I wanted to list as being among my favorites is that we've had 3 episodes fairly recently on the National Artificial Intelligence Institutes here in the United States. So for those of you who don't know, the National Science Foundation here has funded 27 national AI institutes up to this point. A few are just on AI itself, but most of them have a use case connected with them. So there are 5 that are on AI in agriculture. There are, I think, 5 or 6 that are on AI in healthcare. There are 5 on AI in education. And I am the associate director for research for one of those 5, which is on workforce upskilling and reskilling. It's really on adult learning and online education. But the other 4 are all on pre-college education. And thus far, we have featured 3 of those 4 in episodes within the last couple months. And the 4th, we will have this coming Saturday on Silver Lining for Learning at noon, if you want to see something that's happening in close to real time. And each conversation has been very interesting because, of course, these national AI institutes have websites, they have videos, they have overviews where they talk top down about the research that they're doing and the mission they have and why AI is able to help a particular group. But Silver Lining for Learning gives more of a backstage look, where bottom up, people who are leaders of the institutes and practitioners that they serve and some of the researchers that are involved have a conversation about both the opportunities that AI opens up and some of the challenges that are involved in creating and disseminating AI and having it make a difference in the world. So if you're interested in artificial intelligence, I certainly would urge that you consider looking at some of these episodes. And for each of the episodes on the Silver Lining for Learning website, there's about a full page of description that talks about what the episode covers, who the people were, who were guests, some of the background that they bring. So you have a good opportunity to get a sense of the topics. And then also the database is searchable. So if you want to know all the episodes that we've done where AI has been featured, you can do a search and see prior episodes that might relate to these. The other episode that I highlight, and this again is fairly recent, is typical of the episodes where we're looking not so much at a large institute and its work, but at a single project. Francisca Astudillo was a master's student at Harvard with me about 6 years ago. She went back to Chile and involved some colleagues in developing a novel intervention in 5th and 6th grade classrooms for marginalized students in terms of their social emotional skills in response to major challenges that schools were having in classroom management with students. And it's a wonderful intervention. We had a terrific conversation with them about it. Beyond being widely implemented in Chile, now other countries are looking at either doing this or something similar to this, which is something else that we stress in our episodes, that these are not brands. Many of the projects are also models where they could be adapted and used in a different way in a different country. So the chance to talk with these young, passionately interested educators about Eventuras, which is the intervention that they have for social emotional learning, was really exciting and fun. And like many of our episodes, set in a global South country where resources are scarce and where this is a story about overcoming severe resource challenges and nonetheless making a big difference in education. So that's my quick overview of 2 of my favorite recent episodes or themes. And I'm going to toss it to Kurt to talk about what he would like to highlight.
Thank you, Chris. Again, we want to thank all of you who are in attendance today. We heard there were 700 or so people signed up. So thank you, Megan. Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Anita. Thank you, B. I've written down some, Claudia. There are many people who are here on this session. Philippe, thank you for coming today from Chile, which Chris just talked about. I should have been there last week. Unfortunately, I wasn't. I am quite interested in the global aspect of silver lining for learning. And as Chris and Punya and Young were contacting me to get involved in this, I had recently written an article about 20 ways in which learning has changed. And you can get that off my homepage or go to publicationshare.com. Learning is more hands-on, more game-like, more immersive, VR and AR, more massive with MOOCs, more online, more blended or high flex or hybrid, more open, more distance, more informal, more visual, more on demand, more global, like this particular conference is. And I had written the book, The World is Open, How Web Technology is Revolutionizing Education. So having written that, I had interviewed people around the world who became guests on the show. I had a rich pool of guests after having done that book back in 2009. So I was kind of interested in doing something like this originally. And so this was right timing for me. And then COVID happened. And on that first day when we broadcast, I went running before the first show. And I ran for the next 4 years like Forrest Gump every day till this past March. Now I've restarted my streak here since the eclipse. Anyways, that first one MOOC there, first episode there on MOOCs in Nepal, that was a fascinating episode. I'm sure Punya is very excited about it too. You see him dressed in, he had his Halloween costume. That was Halloween 4 years ago. And we had kids from Nepal, teenagers, who took MOOCs to learn English, to get ready for college. They got Harvard certificates and Stanford certificates. These are 12-year-olds, 13, 14, 15-year-olds. And they're defining self-directed learning better than my graduate students were. And these kids are real excited about taking these English MOOCs, but it wasn't just English MOOCs because COVID happened. They had to take all their classes in an online format. And their teacher, named Bayman from Motherland Secondary School, inspired them to form a network of kids learning via MOOCs. And some of these kids didn't just take one MOOC, not just two, not just five. Some took over 100 during COVID. And we're sharing with each other their learnings, and we're prepping for college. A couple now are in a college settings. They've got accepted to IU or to not to India, to other universities in the US for college or other places around the world. So that was fascinating in that particular show. We had these kids back on about a month or two ago to get an update. It was actually a month ago to get an update on what's happening in their lives 4 years later. So that's the first one. Just learning's more massive and scalable. And these kids were inspired by their teacher. So one teacher can change the world or a country by leadership that they're providing and encouraging students to learn in a different way, in an informal way, in a massive way in this case, in an online way. So that I want to point out. And again, some of these kids were totally motivated, and I'm happy to share more with you. We can go to the next slide, maybe, Chris. And we'll hit the next slide. There we go. So the second one, so we had kids in Nepal. We've had 3 episodes related to Nepali learning. We had someone else on who was studying Papua New Guinea and in Nepal and in Bhutan, where she's originally from. So that's a show you might want to listen to as well or watch as well. You can get our shows via different podcast formats as well as watch them in YouTube, get them while you're riding along the trail. But I had a couple friends who had done research in Antarctica, and I had interviewed when doing the World is Open book. One was her name's Cassandra Brooks. Now, Cassandra was a master's student in California when I first interviewed her, and she was going to Antarctica on trips studying the Antarctic toothfish. What we know in the restaurants is the Chilean sea bass. And she was also studying the krill in Antarctica and trying to save the last ocean. So here's a graduate student trying to do her part in educational policy to save the planet, in effect. So I got to know her then. It was about 15, 16, 17 years ago. And since then, she's become a professor at University of Colorado. And so she has taken different trips down to Antarctica in a quest to help with policy, worldwide policy, to save the planet, save the last ocean, and so forth. So she came on our show as well, sharing her knowledge about environmental science and other kinds of marine science and other kinds of things. The other person that's the person on the right. On the left is Jean Pennycook, who you might know is someone who's inspired classrooms of kids around the world, hundreds of classrooms, learning about the Adelie penguin in her studies in Antarctica, sending the information to kids in schools around the world in curriculum, and having kids do activities on penguin science, in effect, and sharing them back with her. So this is a global project, and one that fosters blended learning or hybrid kinds of learning. So in most of these cases I'm showing here, in the Nepal case and in the Antarctic case, it's kind of a focus more on informal learning, non-traditional forms of learning, but there's a reconnection back to the classroom. And so we have both formal and informal learning taking place in here. And so what's interesting, I think, about Silver Lining for Learning is we highlight non-traditional forms of learning. What's maybe you're not readily aware of, it might be happening in different places around the world. And we've been on all continents, I think, around the world, and dozens of countries. But it's not just traditional K-12 or university forms of learning. It's what's happening on the margins, on the edges, that are inspiring, that are enhancing, that are transforming learning in new ways. And the young people, as well as the older, more experienced people that we're interviewing and having conversations with, are providing the options and the menu for what is possible for anyone to learn. That's what's interesting about Silver Lining for Learning. We're giving the possibilities for learning. Learning today can take place in many ways, shapes, or form. Anyone can learn anything from anyone else at any time, which was the motto of my World is Open book. But it's true. The kids in the Philippines were sending questions to Cassandra Brooks when she was doing the Ice Stories project, where she's talking about her research in Antarctica at night when the satellite was available for her, and the kids around the world were asking her questions. So again, anyone can learn anything from anyone else at any time. I think Lydia needs to go next. I've talked long enough, but do take a look at Silver Lining for Learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. I think that's just a perfect segue into what I'm going to talk about. So I'm Lydia Cao. I'm a postdoctoral fellow from the University of Toronto. And today, the episode I'm going to highlight are about alternative education. So if you are familiar with alternative education, that will include homeschooling, micro schools, learning pods, learning co-op, and etc. So the first story I like to highlight is the story of Realm, and that stands for Redesigning Education and Living Meaningfully. So Realm started when two mothers, Jessica Slayback and Victoria Forsman, they couldn't find a school where they would like to send their children. So they decided to build their own. So that's when Realm was born. It has grown from serving one student to 3,500 families over the past 14 years. And they started in an old vacuum repair shop, and they transformed that into a magical learning space where over 2,800 kids has come through their doors. They've primarily so far served children from age 5 to 15, and including homeschoolers and schoolers, traditional schoolers, kids who love school, and those who have had educational trauma. And they are currently expanding to high school with their new member on the team, with Hayden. If I have to summarize the success of Realm, I will put that into 4 pillars. The first one is personalized learning. They custom the schedule and the learning path for each individual learner. They make the timetable work for different family situations and give the children the autonomy and the freedom to choose their learning path. Second is teacher autonomy. The educator there teach what, how, and when they want, and they teach all of the things that they are passionate about. Number 3 is their pedagogy and assessment. So they focus on experiential learning, so a lot of project-based, hands-on approaches. And they also don't use traditional standardized testing for assessment. They get their kids to show what they're capable of through a variety of authentic tasks. Last but not least is a community-centered approach. So rather than describing this as a school, it's more like a village where every family pitch in and where children can learn from a variety of expertise from the community. And does such model of learning work? I think the answer is yes. So what they found is that their students consistently score widely above grade level on standardized tests. Just because they don't use it doesn't mean they can't do it. They also, 100% of their graduates attend high school and program of their choice upon graduating from this program. And the second story I like to highlight is a story of Wickwo. And next slide. So this Wickwo is about two young sisters, Sume and Ayla, at the age of 14 and 11, started their own online school. So they were frustrated by the challenges of remote learning during the pandemic. So instead of waiting for education to change, they took matters into their own hands. So they started their own online school called Wickwo. So the core principles, in their own words, of Wickwo are 5. So they believe that children and adults learn best when they solve real problems, they iterate and improve, when they are free to explore, and when they build on strength, interest, and passion. Last but not least, when they also teach each other. So what's really amazing about Wickwo is that they don't, the kids become coaches for one another. So they do a lot of peer teaching and tutoring. They show each other how to do things. And not only they're able to tap into such diverse expertise in their community, but also kids are building their own competence and confidence when they're showing other kids how to do something. So I think that's really powerful. And so far, from these 5 principles, they've grown their online school, serving nearly 50 states and more than 50 countries in the world. And they are not satisfied with just having an online school. Their dream is much bigger. They want to empower the whole world to take charge of their learning. So what they're doing right now is that they start this free online learning platform to connect global community of learners, educators, entrepreneurs, families who like to start a type of self-driven learning by themselves. And they also support both conventional and these alternative form of education, supporting formats like school clubs, classes, co-ops, learning pods, and micro schools. So breaking down the barrier between traditional school and alternative forms of education. So to summarize what I learned from these 2 episodes, I think the first thing is that excellent education doesn't require expensive facilities or huge budgets. It's happening right now in the most humbling place we can imagine, in people's homes, in converted vacuum repair shops, and online spaces worldwide. And secondly, that true learning emerges from authentic human connections and communities. Last but not least, I think these 2 stories really remind me that education's future isn't about waiting for change to happen. It's about creating this change ourselves. So I'm going to pass this on to Punya.
Thank you, Lydia. And frankly, if you one episode, if you want to see a couple of episodes which are just most amazing, are the ones where we get kids on the show, and the week will quiz the 2 sisters who would sort of talk back and forth with each other. Was just such a pleasure to watch and listen to. Thank you all for inviting us here. My name is Punya Mishra, and I'm currently Director of Innovative Learning Futures at the Learning Engineering Institute at Arizona State University. I'm also a professor in the Teachers College. And when we were discussing which episodes to pull up, I mean, that was seriously a challenge. I mean, we have 200 plus episodes. And so what I'm going to focus on is sort of a set of two sets of 3 episodes. So we did these episodes 62, 63, and 64, all focused on the idea of creativity and play. And then the next set is going to be something actually quite different. And these 3 episodes, they are not don't see learning, play, and creativity as isolated acts, but as deeply social experiences that thrive in these supportive environments. And what does a supportive environment look like? And they're also a critique of traditional education at some level, proposing sort of a fresh, socially rooted perspectives on creativity, joy, and learning. Glavenue and Clapp, in their episode, they sort of dispel this myth of this lone creative genius, that there's this individual who can be creative, but rather look at it more from social interaction and engagement with the surroundings. And this leads into, I think, Schalberg and Harper's look at the importance of unstructured outdoor play, which we showcase through the Anji play model, which is from China. And Gray and Bloom, they sort of talk about this idea for self-directed learning, arguing that children thrive in environments where they're trusted to guide their own learning journeys. And that's actually a theme we will see in other episodes in Silver Lining as well. So there's this recurring tension in some of these conversations between structured education and organic learning, between institutional rules and individual freedom. But the couple of these examples here, one from China, one from the Sudbury Valley School, illustrate that these ideas can work across diverse cultural settings. And I think that's an important thing to recognize, because sometimes we think that certain things work in certain environments and not in others. And they paint a picture of learning as a natural process that blooms in the right conditions rather than through top-down control. So what does that mean for us as educators in these spaces? I think is an important sort of question for us to think about. Could we go to the next slide, please? Chris, could we get the next slide? Thank you. Now, this one is something very different. These are stories, 3 very independent stories. And so the cluster is not as deliberate that we had planned that we would have these 3, but it's more emergent out of the various conversations that we have had. And these happened over episode 140, 51, and 95. And these are incredibly inspiring stories of learning and education in extremely difficult times, and how technology and global collaboration can actually create educational opportunities. And all 3 of them are connected through the country of Afghanistan. And they are both grassroots and institutional responses. The Asian University for Women special programs for Afghan women, Classrooms Without Walls, which actually started with a COVID project and then expanded out to Afghanistan and people there, repurposing virtual teaching methods that were initially developed for Australian teacher training, and then sort of adapted them which led to this project called Flowers for the Future, where teachers and students build virtual classrooms versus Zoom and Google Classroom. And what's remarkable here is that how technology helps education overcome certain very strong barriers, from the hybrid models to the virtual classrooms of Classroom Without Walls. I think these episodes show that education can transcend, in very sort of profound ways, physical and political limits. And these are incredibly, these are episodes which, once they are done, we literally, I'm speaking for myself, just sit back and just take a breath, because you realize the courage, the dedication, the passion, the commitment that all these people are bringing into these educational spaces. When you get to hear from the students who are taking advantage of these for their own growth and then passing it on, I think similar to what Lydia described in the WeKill project, which is, it's not just now about my learning, but I can also peer mentor, I can grow and develop the next generation of educators. So I think there's a powerful message that sort of comes through about the role of resilience in learning, whether in traditional classrooms, conflict zones, that learning is a social participatory process that will find ways to thrive. This is a deeply human thing that we do. And the idea of play, creativity, and self-directed learning. Some of these conversations with this young woman in Afghanistan talking about how they wrote this book of poetry and then got it translated, and now it might actually getting published, are deeply, deeply inspirational. Where technology and human connection can create these meaningful learning experiences. And that education, when we often think about it, it's about knowledge transfer, but it's so much more than that. It is about crafting spaces, which may be physical or virtual, where people can come together and connect and hold on to hope, I think, for the future, even under, I think, which are incredibly difficult times sometimes, right? And I think it's very moving to have some of these conversations and to interact with some of our guests. So those were sort of the two sets, which are, I think, very different from each other. One set which was sort of broadly theoretical and ideas oriented, though instantiated in certain practices, and the second which are dealing with the ground realities of a very difficult political and social situation, but still managing to find our way through it. With that, I will pass it back to Chris to guide us through the next steps. Thank you again for inviting us. This is very exciting. Thank you.
So what we're going to do now is step back from the specifics, with each of us talking about some of our favorite episodes, to look at the whole body of work in Silver Lining for Learning so far is a growing and evolving resource. And just a couple points I'd make on the front end. The first is that even with these individual descriptions from 4 of us, that's less than 10% of the complete database. So there's just an incredible amount of stuff here that you can find through searches, that you can find by just browsing, that speaks to a very broad range of topics. The second thing that I would say is that these really are a ray of hope in the darkness, that we began the series looking in a very dark time with COVID for inspiration from what people are doing bottom up across the world. And we still are living in dark times in some ways, different dark times. And again, we find so much inspiration and joy. There's no extrinsic rewards for our doing Silver Lining for Learning, but intrinsically, these are powerful experiences for us in our own learning. The third thing that I would say, and we wrote an article about this that's available on the Silver Lining for Learning website, published it in a scholarly journal. We've gotten several scholarly rewards and awards for the series, is that these are not things that typically you would find in an EdTech journal or in a scholarly conference, or even in a practitioner conference. These are largely innovations that are happening below the radar. And so there's top-down knowledge in the field that you get from courses and conferences and reading and videos. But then there's bottom-up knowledge that you get from people like us going out and finding all these things that are happening worldwide that are never going to appear in journals or videos or conferences, because the people doing them that's not how they think about their work. And the fact that we're finding those and bringing them to light and is exciting. So what we didn't have in mind, what we started, that Silver Lining for Learning has become as a pedagogical resource. It can be used under a Creative Commons license. You can excerpt things from a single episode and use them in a course. You can take a series of related episodes and use them in a course. And there are cases, if you will, rich video cases that people can draw on. And what we've experienced ourselves and also discussed in the episodes themselves is that there's many possible pedagogical uses of these videos, that it's not just a matter of saying, oh, here's something that's an hour long, you can watch it and you can see what's happening, that there's a lot of ways creatively to take these episodes and to build knowledge from them through cross-cutting themes and through going deeper and having several episodes kind of surround an elephant and gain a deeper knowledge about it. I'll ask my co-hosts here if there's anything that you want to say about the pedagogy of Silver Lining for Learning.
So I'm using these in my classes. And so if you'd like examples, just go to my homepage and look at the syllabi, or just write to me. But definitely number 1, 2, 3, 4, my students are doing and enjoying it, actually. They're taking over and suggesting things to me that could be done with these videos. So that's inspiring too. And some of them are creating their own podcast shows, just taking a look and then going that next step. And hey, what could I do in terms of this? So, and as each season gets added to the mix, there's all sorts of new themes emerging, all sorts of new frameworks that they can think about, new trends in education. Lydia or Punya, you want to add to that?
Lydia?
I'm okay.
So I think one thing that we should mention is not just that it's being used in courses, but also a whole group of people who stepped up and volunteered to take all the backlog of our episodes and create all the podcast episodes for it. So the people you see, they are attributed on the website, but I did want to give a shout out to them as well, because that was a lot of volunteer effort in making sure that all of these episodes were available so that people could use it in the ways that Kurt and Chris have been talking about.
So just a few lessons learned that come out of this. I think that as we look across as co-hosts the episodes, the episodes that featured students have been particularly powerful. Not in any way to disparage experts or practitioners or other people who've done wonderful episodes for us, but young voices and the maturity and the creativity of some of these students is truly, truly inspiring. And overall, just looking at the range of all of the models of education, formal and informal, student-centered, learning-centered, it shows that ed tech really does empower an enormous range of innovations, and that too often we just look at what's available under the streetlight instead of wandering off into the darkness and finding all of these interesting things that are inspiring and that provide models that could be used to make things better. Silver lining for learning is definitely something that's we want to make as participatory as possible. We're always looking for new episodes and new guests. I see in the comments that people are making recommendations. We will certainly look at those, but we're happy to have people volunteer ideas for what might be on the show. And our impact is limited by the fact that this is kind of a hobby for all of us. It's something that we do at the edges of our primary professional work. Each of us is really quite busy with an active professional life. And so if there are ways that you'd like to be involved in helping us to make the website better, to make our outreach better, to help us take longer videos and turn them into short videos that might have a different kind of impact, we would be, delighted to have you join us as a co-volunteer in this effort. And we hope that you will reach out for that. So we're at a point where we've saved about 5 minutes for questions that you would like to bring up and ask. I think probably you put those in the comments, and then we can draw those questions out of the comments. While we're waiting for questions, anything else that my co-hosts want to say?
I'll second Chris's comment that we'd love to have anyone self-nominate to be on the show. Send us an email. And it's great seeing the people here from Berlin, from Sharjah, from Luxembourg, from Woodstock, all the way from Woodstock, Nairobi, from Buenos Aires, Brazil, Chile, all over the world. This is wonderful. This is just like Silver Lining for Learning, because it's about what's happening in education all over the world. Punya.
Well, I just want to second something that Chris said. The fact that you guys are all joining us from across the world means each of you knows at least one or more teams or groups or individuals who are doing interesting work. So just drop us an email and make the connection, and we would love to have them as guests on the show. That's always, a challenge for us to continuously looking for guests. Though, it's funny how many Kurt's Rolodex is pretty deep, and so is Chris's. So we managed to always get great guests, but we are always looking for interesting examples. Like I said, we did a whole set of themed shows on India about nonprofit organizations working in India, which was set of 3 or 4 shows, which were fabulous. So we would love to do something on Brazil or wherever you are at, so that we can get a more rounded picture. This is a chance to, as Chris said, to promote the awesome work that's happening in spaces that often do not get the spotlight. So it's really I think a sort of a task of pleasure for us to be able to do this. I mean, to be if you'd have told me when we started that we would be doing this 4 years from now, I would not have believed you. But here we are, almost 5 years now.
So what questions should we answer first? And a shout out to Josh in Indiana.
I've been babbling in the chat. If people are wondering who's with all those comments, this reminds me of there's a higher ed person named John Edelson. I don't know if you guys know him, out in California, and he told us about a group. His son works for Zoom, and I think is the CTO of Zoom, and this group formed that were media production people to kind of brainstorm during the pandemic how to produce online events and that sort of thing. And this group is still going. It's called Office Hours Global, and they meet all the time. like every day of the week, there's like a different theme. I've dropped into a couple of their sessions, and it's a really interesting format. And they use something like Twitch or something as a back channel too. It's been a while since I looked at it. But I think the idea of these conversation circles is really interesting. It's interesting to these professional conversation circles as a way of staying engaged and being renewed and learning at the same time is really important. And I love how it's a non-traditional activity for academia. I think those kinds of things need to happen more often. So I'm really glad to hear that that's something that is worthwhile to you personally and professionally. My question for you is, where do you see, because of this, I think it's interesting is that I would like to see more teachers in the US at least, or more institutions of learning in the US looking and actually applying things from around the world. Like we've talked about Finland ad nauseum for years, right? And we still don't implement some of the things that they do, like their media literacy curriculum or their emphasis on play or whatever it is. How do we get people in the US to look outside and bring some of the learnings inside? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with you, and I think that part of the problem is that there's this belief that if something powerful is happening in education, it's coming out of an elite university, or it's coming out of an incredibly well-resourced group in some kind of a global north country. And what we find in Silver Lining for Learning is often the most creative ideas are coming out of global south countries, where there isn't the kind of organized resistance to change that frequently takes place in the global north. And that it's things that are truly scalable because they don't require special resources and unusual circumstances to succeed. They're designed for marginalized situations. And so in marginalized situations everywhere, they can be used. So we really need to get past the kind of elitist attitude about where innovation comes from in education and humbly look to places that are, frankly, doing more with less than typically we are.
I guess I will add on to what Chris said. I think what Silver Lining for Learning highlighted is truly inspiring for people who want to innovate in the education space. And by looking at what people who have less resource and what they have done in their community, and I think it is a powerful pedagogical tool to teach educators to, for example, in the classroom for pre-service teacher program, but also for in-service teacher that are battling with a lot of challenges in the front line, to look for inspirations in that's happening other parts of the world.
Do you remember that program from the UK? Was it Teachers TV, where they had a teacher teach a lesson, and then they met with a coach and dissected the lesson, and the whole process was filmed. And I thought it was a brilliant way of providing some really sound pedagogical coaching in a virtual way. And it didn't continue. I think some group absorbed it, but it never continued. And I thought that I like the creative uses of multimedia to make everything more equitable and accessible to teachers. I mean, that's what you're doing with these conversations too, is you're bringing to light all these wonderful case studies.
So if I can just add one quick thought that I have taken away of doing this for 4 years, and I think it sort of builds on something that Chris and Lydia said, which is that very often we think of education in very monolithic terms, like, what does Finland do and how can America do it? That kind of and what I think these episodes have really shown me is that change and things happen in smaller pockets, and that education is such a complex, multidimensional, culturally, contextually grounded thing, that solutions that work in one place don't just magically translate over necessarily, right? And so that's what makes our field so exciting and interesting. And but I think it is that approach that for instance, we had some examples of schools within schools. So within a larger institution, you have a smaller group which is doing something different. And so thinking that way in terms of innovation, rather than thinking like, oh, we are going to do this one big thing, at least for me, that's been a huge takeaway, that these pockets of innovation happen, which I think need to be nurtured and supported, and they will evolve with time and grow and change. And I think that's a really powerful sort of way of thinking about it, rather than how do we change the whole thing in one go, because it's a very complex network of systems that are interacting with each other.
And not only that, Punya, these are all approachable people. Or anyone you could have lunch with and get ideas from. They're all willing to be contacted. So if you watch an episode and would like to be connected to any of the folks that you see in there, or learn more about them, send us a note and we can connect you to them. This is they're all one of us. Each of us is making our difference and making our dent in educational change and progress and reform and so forth. And it's clear in each of these weeks. And Punya was mistaken. We're almost near 5 years. He's 4 years. In another few months, it'll be 5 years completed in the Silver Lining for Learning episode series.
Okay, well, we're getting close to the top of the hour, and we have a slew of other sessions coming right after this. It's almost like a fire hose of content. And I just wanted to stop and say thank you so much for sharing everything. You embody what I call professional generosity, which is putting something out there and for the benefit of others without any context to, or not context, but ties to it, I guess. And I think that that's why I love social media and technology and these kinds of things, because there are opportunities for it to come together with people who have a similar mindset. So thank you so much for your time today, everyone. And please reach out to our speakers if you have suggestions and that sort of thing. And let's give you applause for your panel today. Thanks again for coming.
And thank you, Lucy, for inviting us and for your professional generosity in putting the whole event together.
Yeah, it's been fun. All right. We'll see you at the top of the hour. I'm going to stop the stream, and we'll see you on the other side.